A few different people have pointed out that because the topic is as big as it is and because it's as multi-directional as it is, that it may be a good idea to get into political disadvantages. The one cautionary note that I want to sound is political disadvantages became popular in high school and college debate because people had so much time and so many resources that it became kind of an arms race. What you have to do with a politics dissent to really be effective is you have to rewrite it before just about every tournament. You've got to take all your uniqueness evidence, all your brink evidence, and a lot of times you have to take all of your internal links and your impacts and you have to throw them away. Now, you may not have to rewrite the internal links and the impacts every time, but you may rewrite them several times during the season because what you write your politics disadvantage around may be the passage of a certain bill, and then halfway through the season it gets passed, and you just don't have that available anymore. What we used to have in debate, going back just a little bit further, is a sort of category of argument that worked. It was as malleable and as sort of all-purpose and sort of Swiss Army knife as political disadvantages, but it wasn't as detailed, it wasn't as specific or as precise, and therefore it didn't really need to be updated as often. So, if you're trying to live a balanced life, and if you have a lot of different activities that you're practicing, and a lot of different obligations and chores and duties and so forth, then it could be that instead of going for a politics disadvantage, you may want to go for a movement disadvantage. Now, over the years, depending on what the topic was, we've had a lot of different kind of movement disadvantages. There's been the Christian right movement disadvantage throughout the 70s and 80s. There have been peace movement disadvantages. There have even been environmental movement disadvantages. But what I think there is actually prime ground for a movement disadvantage, given what is being written right now, given recent events, and given the connection to the subject matter of the topic, what I think you might look into, dig around in the literature and see if you can piece this together, would be a movement disadvantage based around libertarianism. Now, it would not necessarily be libertarianism as in the Libertarian Party, the political party that Ron Paul has run as the presidential candidate for a couple of times, even though when he ran for the nomination in 2008, he ran as a Republican. I'm talking about libertarianism as a political philosophy. What I think you could do, I think that you would use the Libertarian Party as kind of a search term. You would use it, you would collect articles that talked about its fortunes, and along the way, you could take the political temperature of the country and find evidence that talked about libertarianism as a philosophy and as a movement, and as a lot of people's increasing perspective on politics. And what I think is very viable, two events that have happened recently. One of them I've already alluded to, the fact that when Ron Paul ran for the presidential nomination of the Republican Party in 2008, it really shocked a lot of people. They expected him to be treated as a fringe candidate and eliminated fairly quickly, but there were a whole lot of people who supported him, and he raised a lot of money, and he was a major influence in a lot of the early debates during primary season. And he stayed in for quite a long time, and I think that you could find political writings from the past several months to a year that said that this was a turning point. This was kind of a founding moment for libertarianism in the party. I also think you could find evidence that talked about the sort of woes that the Republican Party is going through right now with the recent scandals with John Ensign and Mark Sanford, with some of the struggles since the Obama inauguration and some of the fighting back and forth between the McCain camp and the Palin camp, and people talking about how the Republicans really are trying very hard to find their identity and trying to find a voice that will unify them other than Rush Limbaugh. And I think that you can find that there are a lot of people who want to be Republicans, want to have a very powerful and effective political representation for a conservative viewpoint, but what they find appealing about the Republican Party is its libertarian end. And it's possible that if you go digging and find out what's going on with demographics and shifts in public opinion and in political commentary, you could find a good deal of evidence that says that right now is a very critical period for libertarianism in this country, where it could coalesce and become a power, or where it could miss the opportunity and just sort of dissipate. And I think from that you could write a pretty good movement disadvantage. Now, the nice thing about this, movement disadvantages, where the potential for them exists, where current events have lined up so that cards are being written that you can use, it does you no good unless you've got a good link to the affirmatives that are being run on the topic. But the good news is, environmental regulations, environmental laws are a major sore spot for people who have a libertarian philosophy because they feel a lot like government interference in the marketplace. In many cases, that's exactly what they are. Now, the trick is that you have to be able to write your disadvantaged links to go in multiple different directions, because there's absolutely no guarantee with this topic. You already know that the affirmative is going to increase environmental regulation. As a matter of fact, the smart affirmatives probably are not going to do that because it'll make them a sitting duck for a lot of the obvious and very easily researched arguments about environmental policy. But with a movement disadvantage, you've got multiple different directions you can go. That's why these were precursors of the political disadvantage, because that's pretty much the same way. Once you've put your argument together, then the link can go in a lot of different directions, and it doesn't really matter what the affirmative does. You can get very creative as long as you've got a good stockpile of what you need.